watching Gears.
Hey, welcome to Gears. You know, 2007 is a special year because it's going to recognize a lot of milestones in the hot rod industry. For example, 40th anniversary of the '67 Chevy pickup. It's also the 40th anniversary of the Camaro and the Firebird. It's also the 50th anniversary of the '57 Chevy. Now, these cars are all special, but there is one car that is having its 75th anniversary this year that is so iconic that it pretty much single-handedly built the hot rod industry. I mean, it's the car everybody thinks about when you say hot rod. It's the one everybody wants, but they don't think they can have. I'm talking about the '32 Ford, the Roadster, the Coupe, and the sedan. But before we show you that it is actually possible to own one of these cars, we have to ask a question. How does a car stay so influential and so popular for 75 years? Well, take a look. The '32 seemed destined for greatness right from the beginning. The body style was not only unique and really cool looking, but the Deuce also introduced the world to affordable V8 power in the form of the Ford Flathead V8. And almost immediately, people wanted to see how fast they'd go. Right after World War II, racing really began to grow, with stripped-down '32 Roadsters leading the way at places like Muroc and Bonneville. Even though the Dry Lakes races could be extremely hot and windy, it was worth it to be able to open up your car and see what she'd really do, flat out. The Deuce Roadster also became a star on the dirt tracks around the country, as people began to see just how much fun it was to just make left-hand turns. And if you think we have extreme sports now, try doing this with no roll bars or safety equipment like these guys did.
Talk about spectacular footing. Watch this.
But it wasn't until the 1950s that things really exploded with the introduction of drag racing. This brought about bigger, faster engines, and hot rods ruled the streets and the tracks. Now, right in the middle of all of this, a guy named Elvis started shaking his hips, and Chuck Berry picked up an electric guitar and started doing the duck walk, and the whole world went crazy for hot rods and rock and roll, with the '32 Ford and the electric guitar leading the way. Man, it was a wild time.
Ready, set, go, man, go. I got a gal that I love so. Ready.
By the mid-'60s, however, things had changed. Now the Deuce had some competition in the form of factory muscle cars and funny cars, which were changing the look of the typical hot rod. And as rock and roll got wilder and wilder, so did the fenderless Deuce Roadster as it slowly morphed into a single-seated, long-nosed contraption called a top-fuel dragster. And driving these things were heroes like Prudhomme and Garlitz and Coletta and many more. And all of a sudden, it was over. I mean, things changed. Gas got expensive, and people started driving things like Pintos and Vegas and things like that. They took their electric guitars and got rid of them, started singing around a campfire, and right there, the Deuce could have died. And it probably would have, except that there was a young filmmaker named George Lucas. He came out with a movie called American Graffiti, and it just happened to feature a certain '32 five-window coupe that introduced the '32 to a whole new generation of hot rodders. From then on, man, the Deuce was on a roll. From the '80s through the '90s, all the way up to today, it's remained one of the most popular cars ever. Unfortunately, there's another problem. Over the years, the '32 has not only gotten more legendary, it's also gotten more expensive. And there's actually guys out there that are saying, if you don't have $100,000, you can't have a nice Deuce. What? That's crazy. That kind of talk is taking the deuce right out of the hands of the guys that actually made it popular in the first place. The average hot rodder, the guy in his backyard. Fortunately, it's not true. It's a bunch of hogwash, and I'm going to prove it to you by showing you that you can have a nice 32 Roadster for a reasonable amount of money, but you got to build it yourself. Of course, that's what this show is all about. You know, one of the first true freedoms you experience as a kid is that first bicycle. Man, it becomes your transportation to the world, or at least the local neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, man, we all had bikes. And we'd stick playing cards in the spokes, and we'd suck on black licorice, make it look like we were big biker dudes, and it was magic. But a bike wasn't just about transportation. No, it became an extension of your personality. And there were all kinds of bikes out there. There were 10 speeds, there were mountain bikes, there were Stingrays, there were BMX bikes, and they all had their strengths and weaknesses. And that's where the idea for the story of the purple bicycle came from. Because just like a bike might wish it had the talents or skills of another bike, so do we sometimes overlook our God-given talents and wish we had somebody else's talents, skills, because they seem to be better than ours. It's a simple lesson, but something we all need to be reminded of from time to time. Welcome back to Gears, where today we are paying tribute to the most famous car ever built, the 32 Ford, because 07 marks the 75th anniversary of the Deuce. Now, before the break, took you through a brief history of the 32, and we actually brought up the question, is it possible to build one of these cars today on a reasonable budget? The answer, of course, is yes, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But the first problem that you're going to face is just finding a car. Now, you got a couple of options here. You can search and try to find an original car, but you're probably going to spend a lot of money for a rusty old piece of junk. Or you can go with a fiberglass replica, and those are cool. But I've actually got a third option here for you. Come here. I know where there's a whole bunch of pristine, all-steel 32 bodies sitting. And they're priced right. Yeah? Yeah? Let's go take a trip. The place we're going is the small town of Brookville, Ohio, just outside of Dayton, and it's the home of a family-owned and operated business called Brookville Roadsters. Their specialty? All-steel reproduction roadster bodies for 32 Fords and Model A's.
First year I went to Hershey with everything in the back of a 6-foot bed with a tonneau cover on it and sold it all. And that started the ball rolling.
And it wasn't long before his brother Chuck and his son Kenny came on board to help out.
I just felt like there was more to this market, so that's when we decided that in '97 we're going to do the 32 Roadster. So we developed all the tooling and dies and stuff to do the 32. There was just really there wasn't enough aftermarket for just the pieces, but there was a huge market for the bodies because the bodies are so hard to find.
They're like a deck of cards, man, just like a whole stack of dashes.
The Model A never had a dash. That's something we developed, was an all-steel dash. That was actually bolted into a Model A, 32 style dash.
Now, I know you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. They probably take a bunch of Taiwanese panels, right? Patch them all together, try to pass it off as a Deuce. No, man, you're not even close. You're not going to believe this. Every Brookville car starts the same way. It's just a bunch of flat sheet metal that just happens to be the exact same thickness as what Henry Ford used back in 1932. The sheets of steel then go to some of the biggest, coolest, vintage presses I've ever seen. Here, the metal is formed over handmade dies to stamp out body parts that are such exact duplicates of the originals that they will fit perfectly on an original car. And if you happen to have an old rusty Deuce or Model A, this is a really nice option to have. All right, let's see. Something like that. Think the rental car place would have a problem with that? The real surprise, though, was the ultra high-tech, space-age lubricant they used to keep the dies from sticking. Why Crisco?
Yeah, I bought a franchise in Crisco.
Oh, yeah?
Just kidding. No, that's one of the best draw lubes there is.
The other press was even more impressive because it looked like it came right out of an old science fiction movie. Now, to give you an idea just how massive this press is, I'm 6'1", and I'm dwarfed by this thing. Oh, you ever get tired of that? That's so cool. Now here's an interesting twist. After the parts leave the old school presses, they go into a state-of-the-art laser cutter that trims all the edges off. Then, after some final finishing work, you end up with a brand new steel part that hasn't been made for 75 years.
If you want a 32 Ford, this is it. Henry didn't make plastic 32s, so you know that's that's what our customers want, and that's what right. You know, what else can you say about it? But it is what it is, you know.
Okay, up to now, this is pretty impressive. I mean, making your own body parts, I mean, not just anybody can do that. But now, what do you do with the body parts? I mean, obviously somebody's got to put them together that knows where they go. How do they pull that off? Well, you're just gonna have to keep watching. Hey, today we are talking about the most iconic car ever built, the 32 Ford Roadster. And we are right in the middle of following Brookville Roadsters through the process of making an all-steel body for us. Now, once the body panels are made, then what? Well, you start putting it together. This is where the process gets really cool. Using a jig and an original firewall, the floor structure is slowly assembled and spot welded together, with every piece being fitted and installed the old-fashioned way, with human hands and a little bit of friendly persuasion.
Once we get the doors mounted, then put the quarter panels on, and we start squaring the trunk opening.
Now, even though these bodies feature new panels that are perfect replicas of original pieces, that doesn't mean these bodies just pop together in a few minutes and they're done. No, they didn't go together that way in 32, they don't do it that way now. No, these bodies have to be hand-built, and the final fit falls into the hands and the hammers of the Brookville assembly crew.
It's the only way to move these things.
And they could probably do this in their sleep. The body then continues down the line just like back in the day, slowly getting more body panels added as each craftsman adds his touch to the body. Now, when we say that these bodies are all metal bodies, we mean just that. No plastic or fiberglass is used anywhere. The seams are all finished out the old-fashioned way, with lead. After the area is prepped with tin, the lead bars are heated so they melt, and the metal is globbed onto the body, making what looks like a really big mess. The lead is then heated again, so it's the consistency of warm butter. Then it's worked smooth with a wooden paddle dipped in tallow to keep the paddle from sticking. As you can see, it doesn't take much to work and flow the lead into the shape and the contour of the body. Very similar to the way that you would work plastic body filler, except this stuff won't get hard on you in a few minutes. You can work it as long as you need to. Once the paddle shaping is done, the lead is cut down to its final shape and contour with a file, leaving an area that's every bit as strong and permanent as the base metal. This is how all bodywork was done back before plastic fillers came along. One thing that is modern about the Brookville bodies, whoa, rumble seat, is that you can set them up however you want. I mean, if you want door handles and a cowl vent and a rumble seat, you just gotta let them know.
I try to do everything for my customers. Each and every one I sell something to, they become my friends. And they've all got my cell phone number. When they call, I try to take care of whatever they need.
Another issue that comes up when you're building a modern old car is that even though these guys are building cars that for all intents and purposes are 75 years old, the standards are much higher today than they ever were back in 1932.
Everyone wants 2006 fit and finish on a 32 Ford, and that's what Brookville Roadster has provided to the industry.
Okay, the body's coming together, looking good. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what about a frame? I mean, the body's got to sit on something, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. Now, you can build your own frame using aftermarket parts, Or you can try to hunt down an original frame and modify it using aftermarket parts. Or check this out. Not surprisingly, Brookville has a whole pile of frames laying around because they build them right here in-house. And they're far superior to a stock frame because of the modern driving and drivetrains that people are going to be using. Now they start with new rails, and then they fully box them for strength and install all of the cross members too. So you'll have a strong foundation when you actually start building your car. Now, why is this important? Well, for a lot of reasons. First of all, the 32 Ford is the quintessential hot rod. It pretty much wrote the book on hot rodding. I mean, it was there from the very beginning in the 40s, and then into the 50s and 60s, it was a powerhouse, and it survived the 70s and 80s, and on up to today, it's as popular as it ever was. The 32 Ford is to hot rodding what the electric guitar is to rock and roll, one of the basic elemental principles. Now, it's also the 75th anniversary of the Deuce, and we wanted to do something special for that. And third, a lot of people think that you can't find these cars, and if you can, you can't afford them. Now, if you're after an original car, that's probably true. But the aftermarket is such now that there's all kinds of choices out there with fiberglass bodies and steel bodies like this. There's everything out there to build the car that you want. And that's what we're going to show you how to do with this car here in a couple weeks. But first, we need to show you what else is involved in building an all-steel body. Real hot rod has 3 pedals. Now, like I said before, getting a frame that's got all the mounts and the brackets and the pedal assemblies installed will save you a tremendous amount of labor when you go to build the car. Just make sure that you know what you want, or you'll have to cut it all out and redo it if you change your mind. Okay, with the body assembled and the frame ready to go, it is time to put them together. And this is a very tedious, time-consuming task because this is where the door gaps, the body lines, all of the fitment of the body is done. And it takes time. And I guarantee you, the cars that rolled out of the factory in '32 did not have door gaps this nice. Finally, everything was done and ready to be loaded up. This is the coolest thing. We're gonna take you for a ride in it. Just wait. You in the back seat. You in the back seat. Now, since I'm building the car to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Deuce, it was only fitting to have all the guys at Brookville sign the car to represent the craftsmanship and pride that they put into each one of these things. And of course, they were glad to oblige, and in true hot rod fashion, wrote a whole bunch of stuff that we can't put on the air. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, man, this is a nice car. It is, but it's not a car yet. No, it's still just a bare body sitting on a bare frame. Now, you get to go to work because all the design work, the motor, the drivetrain, the chassis, the suspension, the steering, the interior, all of that still needs to be done. And the more of that stuff that you can do, the more fun you're going to have, and the more the price will stay down. And that is always a good thing. Okay, let's see what else these guys wrote here. Okay, with any project, a 32 or whatever, before you start, man, you got to have a plan. You have to have a direction. You have to have a vision of what you want to build, or you might as well just take your money, throw it up in the air, and let the wind carry it, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, obviously, a few weeks ago, we showed you what we're starting with. We went to Brookville Roadsters, got a brand new all-steel 32 body and frame. Now, the big decision. What direction do we go with this thing? Now, obviously, nostalgia cars are hot. 40s, 50s style. Also, modern-day smoothies are hot. But no, we're not going those directions. We're doing something completely different. We're actually going to build a car that looks like it rolled right out of 1968. Why? Well, because '68 was right in the heart of the muscle car wars, and a hot rod was still hot. So a guy building a car like this in '68 would have been running against Chevelles, Mustangs, Camaros, all that Mopar stuff. It would have had to have been hot. So, if the fastest car in the valley in 1968 was a Deuce Roadster, what would it look like? That's the car we're going to build. All right, here's the plan. We're going to build a late 60s hot rod, roughly 1968. Now, most of the muscle cars back in that day were running in the mid-14s. Some, once in a while, would hit a high 13. So, this car has got to run at least in the mid-12s because we're building the fastest car in the valley and we want to spank those muscle cars. Now, it also needs to handle, stop well, and be reliable enough for daily use because we're not building any trailer queens here. No, this needs to be a runnable, drivable car. Now, number 3 and number 1, they might argue a little bit because it needs to look like that, but it needs to do this like 2007. Now, number 4, it needs to be reasonably affordable. And we're gonna do that by doing the best bang for the buck, just like somebody would have done back here. No stupid money here. And number 5, it's got to be really cool. And if we pull these off, number 5 is gonna take care of itself. Now, the first step to building a car like this is to mock it all up, starting with the front suspension. Now, since the beginning of time, the coolest front ends to ever go on these old hot rods is a dropped axle and some sort of radius rods. So that's what we're gonna do. Now, this suspension system comes from a place called Total Cost Involved. And you can see there has been a lot of improvements made to this style suspension over the years. Now, you can get a fully polished system like we've got here, or if you're on a tighter budget, TCI also offers these in just bare steel, so you can save about 1,500 bucks. Now, the system comes with a dropped I-beam axle, polished stainless spindles on the end, and then moving on out, you've got your steering arms, and then we decked them out with a fully polished disc brake system. Now, disc brakes were just starting to happen in the late 60s on street rods, so that fits our criteria. And it also fits number 3, helps us stop better. Now, here in the middle, we have the spring, we've got the bat wings, got the radius rods, we've got all the steering linkage. Man, I know it looks like a bunch of parts just exploded all over this table, but you're gonna be surprised how simple and easy this all goes together. The first thing we're gonna do is bolt the hangers and the bat wings onto the axle. Now, make sure if you're using parts that are stainless steel that you give them a good coat of anti-seize so the threads don't strip and gall on you. Now, I know that this is a mess and it's a pain, but it's one of the necessary evils to using stainless steel. Next, we'll follow that up with the spring, and it just slides into the perches using the stainless hangers. Once the axle is assembled, we'll just bolt the whole thing into place on the front cross member using the supplied U-bolts and retainer. Now we're ready for the radius rods, or what's also known as a hairpin, because they look like giant ladies' hairpins. Now, what they do is basically hold the axle in place, keep it from moving front to rear. Now, up here in the front, they bolt to these bat wings, and then here in the rear, they bolt to this existing bracket. And that's why it's so cool to have somebody like Brookfield Roadsters set up your frame for you, because at this point, everything should pretty much lay into place with no surprises. Next up, the brakes. Now, like I said before, we're using discs on this because it fulfills criteria number 1. Guys were starting to put disc brakes on their hot rods in the late 60s. And number 3, it will help us stop better. Now, we got this whole polished and chrome front suspension from TCI. That also includes this killer disc brake setup, which is designed to slide right on the spindle, starting with this polished backing plate. And the steering arm. Then we'll follow that up with the rotor and the hub. And finally, the crown jewel, these smooth and polished calipers. Now, the only trick to these is they come with these shims, and you'll want to shim this thing out to where it actually centers over the rotor. Yeah, look at that. A lot of polish, a lot of chrome. All right. Now, we come to the steering, and the first part of that is bolting in this Flaming River Vega-style steering box. Now, on these kind of cars, you got a couple choices where you can mount the box. Now, the old way to do it is to mount the box something like this, put the pitman arm on, and then it pushes and pulls the drag link down the side. This is called a side steer. We're not gonna do that. Now, we're gonna do something that's a lot cleaner, a lot less prone to bump steer. It's called a cross steer.
I'll explain that to you once we get this box bolted in. The first piece is the tie rod, and now is a good time to set some preliminary toe in for the wheels. Next is the drag link. Now, since the steering box makes 5 turns lock to lock, centering it up at 2.5 turns will put us right where we need to be so we get a full range of steering. All right, let's take a look at how the cross steer works. Now, when you turn the wheel, the pitman arm pulls the drag link, and that in turn steers the wheels. Now, the cool thing about a cross steer is it's all tucked inside here, nice and tight, nothing hanging down the outside. Man, this is a cool setup. The problem with the cross steer, step back there a little bit. When you steer it, oops, that axle wants to move side to side because the only thing holding that axle in place and keeping it from moving side to side is that spring, and that spring's got some give to it. And you've got tremendous side-to-side pressure coming from that steering box. Now, obviously, you can't leave it that way because it'll wander all over the road and mess up criteria number 3. So, the way we're gonna fix it is with a panhard bar, and it bolts to this bracket right here on the frame and over to the bat wing on the other side. And that pretty much takes care of the front end. Now step back, take a look at this, man. This is awesome. And I know you're thinking, man, this is great. You just bolted together in a few minutes, right? No, remember, you are building a car here, and now is when you have to tweak it and make it right. And you have to understand caster and camber and toe in and all that steering geometry. For example, take a look at this. These adjustments right here at the bat wing, those are not just to center the axle front to rear. They also set the caster of the axle, which is the rearward tilt. And that needs to be about 6 to 8 degrees at ride height, which means once you have the motor in and you've got the frame raked the way it's gonna be, probably gonna have to adjust that, or the car will probably handle like a unicycle, and you definitely don't want that. Now, don't be nervous on me here. This is something you can do. You just need to be prepared and do your homework before you get into a project like this. Now, there are a couple of things that we're still missing on the front of the car. Wheels and tires. This is a very important decision because wheels and tires absolutely set the look and the tone of your project. Now, obviously, we want something that looks like it came off of a 60s race car. So, we went to our buddies down at Team 3 Wheels and got what they call the ET Dragmaster. Now take a look at these things, man. They are cool. They have the little polished rim, they've got the cast center, they're a one-piece wheel, a little 15 by 5. I mean, these things look like they came right off of a gasser or a fuel altered, man. They are awesome. They even have a special lug nut that just slides right in the pocket. Now, the tire is just as important as the wheel. And if you want vintage tires, you gotta go to Coker Tire. And that's where we went to get these Firestone front runners. Now, these have exactly the look that we're after, but the cool thing about Coker Tire is they make the tires vintage, but they use all modern rubber, all modern technology, so you can actually drive these things down the road and not end up in a ditch. All right, let's put these things on. There you go. Oh, that's great. That front end is smoking. Now, this rear end housing and those axles came from total cost involved. And the cool thing about doing it this way is that it's already the right width and all the bracketry is already mounted to go right in the car. Now, this saves you from having to go to a junkyard, finding an axle, cutting it down, and mounting all this bracketry. This is the way to go. Now, for the center chunk, we went to our buddies at Curry Enterprises, got one of these 9+ chunks, had them stuff it with a 350 gear, which is gonna be perfect with the transmission we're gonna use. And you're gonna find out about that on a later show. And then there's a True Track posi stuffed in here. Man, this thing is ready to rock. Gonna give us plenty of power to both tires, and it will handle whatever horsepower we're gonna throw at it. All right, let's put these things together. That's it. Once the chunk's in place, we'll slide in the axles. What are you doing over there? All right, brakes are the next issue. And believe it or not, drum brakes on something that light work really well. And there's a lot of companies out there that have drum brake setups for 9-inch Fords. However, we want our rear brakes to match our front brakes. So we went to Stainless Steel Brake Corporation and got this rear disc brake setup. Now check this out. You got these 4-piston polished calipers. They're gonna match those fronts perfectly. Then you have a polished emergency brake caliper, slotted rotors, brackets, hardware, everything to put this in. Now, some of you guys are going, whoa, expensive. No, I want disc brakes, but I don't want to spend a lot of money. Well, you're in luck because Stainless Steel Brake Corporation has got some economy disc brake setups that'll give you the stopping power of discs without the high cost. However, they're not going to look like these. When you see these on, you're going to want them. The first step is to bolt the brackets to the housing. Follow that with the rotor. And then finally bolt on the main caliper and the emergency brake caliper. Look at that. Is that cool or what? Now, with the axle assembled, we'll just get it in place under the frame so we can bolt it in. The suspension that we're going to use to hold that axle in place is a triangulated 4-link and coilovers that we got from TCI. Now, I know, nobody was really using a triangulated 4-link back in '68. But once this is in place, the only thing you're going to see are those lower bars. And that is going to look like a trailing arm, which they were using back then. So it's going to have the right look to it. Now, if I want to run those mid-12s or better, I need something that's going to plant that axle and get traction to those rear tires. A 4-link will do that for me. It also needs to be adjustable and handle well enough for modern day traffic. Coilovers will do that. So, 4-link and coilovers it is. Now this is the magic of a 4-link. Watch this. This pinion angle does not change as it goes through its full range of motion. Back down. Look at that. But look at this, look at this. You still get great axle articulation when you hit a bump, but no side-to-side movement. That's because of those triangulated upper bars. This is a great setup. The last thing are wheels and tires. Now, just like the front, we went to Team 3 wheels and got a set of these Drag Masters. Except the big difference is, these are 10 inches wide. Yeah. Now, the tires are key here. So we went back to Coker Tire and got a set of these vintage Firestone drag slicks. And these are also 10 inches wide. But the good thing about these, they're technically street legal because they got these little rain grooves in them. Yeah, right. Which means these are gonna suck in the rain. But they're gonna be great when you try to hook up out on the street or on the strip, which is exactly what somebody would have put on their car back in '68. Matter of fact, it's what you should put on your car now. And it's good to know that some things never change. Now, this absolutely takes care of number 1, number 2, but really pegs number 5. Now, one more thing we want to cover before we move on to something else. This project went together fairly quickly. Some of you guys are going, oh, yeah, that's great. It just bolted together. That is great, but that doesn't happen by accident. This is where your pre-planning comes in, and that's true with any project. For example, when you buy a bare frame like this from Brookville Roadsters, it's only a few $100 more to have them weld in all the brackets, cross members, motor mounts for whatever setup you're going to use. That way, when you go to put it together, it does pretty much bolt together. And that saves you a ton of time, which makes that a great investment, which is one of our main criteria. Yeah, you thought I forgot about that one, didn't you? Now, the purpose of this project is first to show you that it's possible to build a really cool 32 and not spend a fortune. And second, to show you how to build a car that makes sense. You know, something that has the look and the feel and the style of what you want to drive, and then follow that through. Now, the idea behind this car is basically to build what would have been the baddest car in the valley in '68. Basically American Graffiti 5 years later. Now, the problem is, in '68, man, you got Mustangs, you got Camaros, you got Roadrunners, you got Pontiacs running down the street. So how do you take a Deuce Roadster and not only make it cooler than those cars, but also make it outrun those cars? Well, first you're going to have to start with a serious hot rod engine. You know, something that just screamed performance in '68. You know, probably something with multiple carbs on it. Now, obviously, it needs to be fast. I mean, it's the fastest thing in the valley in '68. So it needs to be able to at least run the mid-12s. And to do that, you're going to have at least 500 horsepower. Now, how in the world are we going to do that and still keep it reliable enough for daily use? I mean, you're going to have something like a supercharger. The problem is, superchargers aren't exactly cheap and just growing on trees in '68. So, what would have been the cheapest engine to supercharge and still get the power that we're after? Huh? That's right, you got it. The small block Chevy. I know some of you guys are thinking, no, you didn't put a small block Chevy in there. You've ruined the project. No, I don't believe it. No, no. Man, calm down. Calm down. Just wait. Are you done? Now, I have to say, this is one of the coolest things that we've done. Man, the guys on the website have been great. They've come in and they've said nail heads, they've said flatheads, they've said Hemis, they've said big block Pontiacs, Chevys, Fords. It's been fantastic, man. You website guys rock. And the thing is, it's making people think. It's making you wonder and decide what you would do to your car. Now, the thing is, when you take all those other engines, the flatheads, the Hemis, everything, and plug it into this criteria, small block Chevy comes out on top. Mostly because you can get tremendous power out of them for the best amount of money. Now, don't think for a second that I'm just going to stick another small block Chevy in that car. No, man. I hate that as much as anybody. There's nothing worse than just a boring crate engine out of the crate in a car. Now, man, the key here is to build an engine that looks and feels and acts just like the car. That's the key to a hot rod. So, we went to our buddies at Keith Craft Racing Engines, and this is the motor we put together. Starting with a seasoned 350 4-bolt main block, they stroked it with a Lanotti crank, rods, and blower pistons to bring the cubes up to 383. Then to keep the air and fuel flowing in great volume, they have high-flowing Brodex aluminum cylinder heads, stuffed with stainless steel valves, screw-in studs, guide plates, and topped with roller rockers. Now, sitting on top of an already stout street engine is the crowning jewel, a Wyand 250 supercharger. And it has got the classic '60s look with the polished finned aluminum case and the 3-inch wide Gilmer belt and the polished pulleys. I mean, all the good stuff. Of course, topping this whole thing off is a pair of Holley blower carbs and a Wyand blower scoop, which not only makes this engine look the part of a '60s drag racer, it'll run like one too. So, just how powerful is it? Well, as with every Keith Craft performance engine, before they ship them out to you, they run them in and they dyno them. Now, the magic numbers on this particular engine, take a look at this. We are sitting at about 580 horsepower and just under 500 foot-pounds of torque. This is great. That's gonna make that car just insanely fast. And that's all on pump gas, all reliable enough to drive every day. And that is the magic of a supercharger. Not only that, but it looks fantastic. Now, like I said before, if you don't want your engine to look like everybody else's out there, well, you need to spend a little bit of time here on it. Because if you want it to hit an era, well, it's all in the details. Now, we're okay up here. Down here, we've got a lot of modern hardware. So we're gonna cover up that modern hardware with some vintage parts. Come on. These are classic Edelbrock finned aluminum valve covers that we got from Summit Racing. And these are great, man, because Edelbrock makes these just like they did back in the day. Take a look at this. Got the thick aluminum casting, they're nicely polished,
They got the ribs that run all the way down the ends. These are great. The problem is there is no oil filler or breathers on these. So we're going to show you how to take care of that problem just like they did back in the day. Now, the reason that we're using the small block Chevy is that it not only gives us the power that we're after, it also gives us the reliability and the affordability that we needed, and it's also really, really cool. Now, the question at this point is, how do you take an engine like this where you're using some modern components and still make it look vintage? Well, the key to that is in the valve covers a lot of the time. So we're using these classic Edelbrock valve covers because they have the right look, and then we're going to open them up and let them breathe by putting on these tall moon breathers that we got from Honest Charlie's Speed Shop. Now, we're doing that for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is exactly the sort of modification that somebody would have done back then. Second of all, Moon, Edelbrock, and Honest Charlie's Speed Shop are all names that definitely would have been on a 60s hot rod. All you have to do is decide where you want the breather. Now comes the fun part. Make darn sure you want to do this. A little tough to weld that back on. Then grind off the fins. Sorry, Vic, but it's for the greater good. And that is how quickly a name disappears. Smooth everything down to give you a good mounting surface. Follow that by drilling your holes and mounting your breather. And there you have it, the late 60s all over again. Now, some of you guys are probably going, man, you know, you're right, that does look like a vintage engine, except for one thing. What about those aluminum heads, man? Nobody had aluminum heads back in the 60s. And you're right, they didn't. So, when I do my final detailing, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint the heads the same color as the block so they just kind of disappear, and that's gonna give me the look that I'm after. Now you might be thinking, painting aluminum, I don't know about that. It's not gonna be a problem as long as you prep the metal good, use a nice high heat paint, it's gonna stick great, you're not gonna have any problem. Now, for those of you that are wondering just how that's gonna look, take a look at this. Now that's what we're talking about. See what a difference just a little bit of time and effort can make? Now look at this, check this out. Over here you have more of a modern look. I mean, it looks like parts just pretty much came out of the box, and that's cool until you compare it to this. I mean, this has the look, it has the punch, and it puts us in the era that we're after. Now, some of you guys may be thinking, it's easy for you, man. You got the fancy tools, you got the high dollar paint. Now, hold on a minute, man. Here are the tools that I used. Just a rasp in a drill press. Then I use this detail sander. And as far as paint goes, just a couple cans of Duplicolor engine paint, man. This stuff has got a ceramic in it, so it'll not only handle the heat of an engine, but it also won't be ruined by gas and oil leaks. So, if you spend a little time and make it look good when you're detailing things out, you're gonna end up with an engine that'll look great for a long, long time. Now, what about the transmission? Obviously, man, it's gotta be a stick. I mean, everybody was jamming gears back then. Now, since we are going to drive this car a lot, well, using a modern day 5-speed is really the way to go here. And Kiesler Engineering has got exactly what you're looking for. They've got this modified Tremec TKO 5-speed. Yeah. This is great, man. This thing has nice, tight shifts. It's got a hydraulic throwout bearing already installed, and it's tough. I mean, this thing will handle the power that engine's kicking out. Now, to go with this, we also got one of their new bell housings. We've got a flywheel, pressure plate, clutch. We've got the master cylinder, hoses, and all kinds of hardware. And that's the cool thing about using somebody like Kiesler on this. They've done all the homework, so you get all the parts. Now all you have to do is put it all together. All right, thank you very much.
This ain't right. First, you want to get the engine in place. And to set this engine back far enough to clear the front cross member meant that I had to clearance the firewall to make room for the distributor and the bell housing. Now make sure that you keep your cuts clean and symmetrical because this will be seen. Perfect. With that done, it's time to roll the engine in place. All right, the idea behind any engine fitting project, whether it's a rod or a muscle car or an old truck or a Jeep or whatever you're working on, man, is to set the engine far enough back to where you can clear the front cross member and the radiator, but not too far back to where you have firewall problems. Take a look at this. This is why I had to clearance the firewall. Now, of course, you want to center the engine side to side, unless, of course, you're offsetting it on purpose for some reason. Then, of course, don't forget, you don't want to go too high and have hood problems if you're running a hood. Then again, you don't want to go too low and have an oil pan problem on the ground. So as you can see, there's a lot of measurements and a lot of pre-planning that goes into a project like this, but it's worth it. All right, with the engine sitting level, centered up, pushed back where it needs to be, the only way you're gonna bolt this engine down to this frame mount is to use this special motor mount from Brookville Roadsters. Now, as you can see, this thing is offset, and that is what sets the engine back an extra 1.5 inches and gives you the clearance that you need up here when you're running a supercharger. The next step is to open up the floor to make room for that big 5-speed transmission. At this point, you are ready to set the angle of the engine and build the transmission cross member. Now, generally, you want the engine to sit about 3 degrees angled toward the rear, but that's on a vehicle that's sitting level. If you're building something that's sitting down in the rear or rake down toward the front, like this car is, well, you need to take that into consideration as you build the cross member, or you can end up with some serious drive shaft problems when you put it all together. Now, any real hot rod in the 60s had a serious set of pipes running down the side, and the Rat Roadster is no exception. So we went to our friends at Sanderson Headers and created a special Rat Roadster header that you can buy. Now, the whole idea here was to create a special 2-in-1 functional exhaust system. Check this out. Started with a nice side header exhaust, goes outside the frame rail, down the side, got a nice long tube, it's gonna look cool, and of course, you have a standard header cap. Now, when the cap is on, the exhaust comes out the side, under the car, through the mufflers, nice and quiet. When you're ready to rock, you pop the cap and there you go. Now, I know you guys are thinking, wait a minute, man, there's nothing new there, it's been around forever, what are you doing? You're right, it has been around forever, but there's a problem. Most people never pop their caps off, either because they never intended to, or because they don't want to burn their hands on a hot header cap. And the whole idea behind having this is to be able to pop that cap whenever you want. When the time is right, will you be ready?
A successful automotive project takes planning and organization, but instead of using an old tablet or notebook, there's the Gears Deluxe Project Planning Book. This was designed to help you lay out a project, the parts, the tools, costs, and keep it organized with colored tabs, a pouch for receipts, and even a place to attach photos. If you decide to sell the vehicle, it serves as a complete history of what's been done. If you have a project or plan on starting one, the Gears Project Planning Book is the best way to lay it out and make it happen.
One of the cool things about building and working on a vehicle yourself is that the rig just naturally starts to take on a personality of its own, and it can't help it. But it's not about how much money you spend. No, man, it's about imagination and creativity. And the more imaginative and creative you are, well, the cooler the vehicle gets, no matter what you're working on. And a prime example of that is the Rat Roadster. But there is a lot more to building a cool vehicle than just an engine and a transmission. No, it's how you finish things out.
You know, take care of the details. That's what's going to make a vehicle unique and really cool. That's what we're going to focus on today, starting with the exhaust. Now, like I said last week, we teamed up with Sanderson Headers and created a special rat roaster header. Now, the key to this header is to not only have a functional header cap, but it's also to kind of hide the exhaust that runs under the frame so you can't really see it from the side. Now, the problem with that, as you can see, the exhaust exits right into the bottom of the frame rail. Yeah, it's kind of hard to hook a pipe to that. So, we're going to have to notch the bottom of the frame. First, we'll cut out the area that needs to be removed with the plasma cutter. Then dress the cuts with a grinder. Now, getting the car up in the air on jack stands or on a lift will definitely help you here. Now, basically what I've done is cut a notch in the bottom of the frame so the exhaust goes through the bottom of the frame as it goes under the car. Now, notice it's sitting at an angle. That's because that is how it comes out of the header. So this is going to be really cool, but we're not done yet. I know some of you guys are looking at it going, oh man, you just cut a hole in the bottom of your frame, man. That cannot be good. It's not if you leave a gaping hole there. No, you've got to box in the bottom of the cut so it's solid like the rest of the frame. Now, the best way to do that is to get a nice thick piece of steel tubing and cut your replacement piece out of this. Now, make sure that you are using a piece that is at least as thick or thicker in the wall as your existing frame rails. That way you're not going to have a strength issue. There we go. Now we'll just take the cut piece, stick it in the press to close the ends up to where it matches the pipe better. Once you have the boxing piece for the notch fitting right, weld it in and finish it off. And that is it. Now, a C-notch like this is great as long as you don't get too deep into the frame. Matter of fact, a good rule of thumb is if you're going to get halfway into the frame or more, you need to take a different approach because that's going to weaken the frame too much. But one like this, take a look. We still have 5 inches of frame above that notch, which is plenty strong. All right, let's put the header on, see what we got. All right, take a look at this. The exhaust runs out of the header, through the frame, and under the car. Now, if you look at that just right from the right angle, you will see that modification. But most of the time, especially from the side, man, you will never know that's there. That is so cool. That's so sneaky, man. I love it. Now, that takes care of the exhaust under the car. What about this? I mean, the whole idea about having a header cap is to be able to pop the cap and run straight out of the headers when you want. The problem is, what do you do to get it corked back up before the cops get here? Yeah, typical hot rod dilemma. We have the typical hot rod answer over here on the table. What we've got here is a pair of dual electric exhaust cutouts from a place called QuickTime Performance. Now, this is basically just a flat flange with an electric motor installed, and that electric motor actuates this big butterfly valve. So, when you hit the switch, those babies come open. You are running right out of the headers, man. This is awesome. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about leakage? Well, check this out. These are machined with a little ledge here on both sides. So, when that butterfly comes closed, notice it goes right down and seals against that ledge. These are designed to be leak-free. Now, what we're gonna do is bolt it to the back of the collector in place of the cap. We're gonna get rid of that. Then we're gonna follow it up with this turnout. So when we're driving down the road, everything nice and quiet, that's what you've got. When we wanna be really nasty, we flip the switch and open they come. These will get you into some serious trouble. Now, the good thing about these QTP cutouts is that you don't have to be doing a project like this to put them on. I mean, you can put them on anything, a car, truck, whatever you're working on. And with a cool factor like this,
What are you waiting for, man? This is what hot rodding's all about. Now, since this is a custom application, the first thing you need to do is to decide where you're gonna put your cutout. Now, QTP designs these cutouts to where they sit down at an angle, which is gonna be nice. It'll tuck up under the frame. But as you can see, we have got a clearance issue here with the frame. So we're gonna have to notch it just like we did back here. With the frame notched, the cutout just bolts up to the collector, followed by the turnout. All right, take a look at how this is tucking up underneath here. It's very clean, very stealthy, and like before, with this car down on the ground, you are gonna have to look really hard to even see that that is on there, and that is cool. But the way it looks is only part of it. The real issue here is functionality. So how does it work? Well, let's take a look. With it closed, the exhaust runs under the car, nice and quiet. Then you push the button, and open it comes, and it is wide open in your face. And there you have it, a super sneaky 2-in-1 exhaust system that has the look of the outside header exhaust that everybody wanted in '68. But this has a little bit of new technology to make it usable. Oh, man, think of the trouble you could get into with this, man. Guy pulls up beside you at a stoplight, drinking coffee, talking on his cell phone. You uncork that, man. It's gonna be time for him to change his shorts. Now, I've got one other thing that I want to show you before we get off of the exhaust. Obviously, I am tying that car into 1968 in a whole bunch of ways. However, I also hooked up with the Gibson Guitars custom shop because 1958 marks the 50th anniversary of one of the most iconic rock and roll machines, the 335. And we are going to build a Rat Roadster 335. And you guessed it, gonna have exhaust blowing right out of the guitar. It's gonna be awesome. Now, they've got me doing the preliminary design work and the metal work, then they're gonna finish up the woodworking and put it all together. But you're gonna have to wait for this because obviously it's still something that we're working on. Okay, the next thing we're gonna take a look at is a subtle little modification that just makes a world of difference on a 32 Ford. And notice we have a great body line coming down, makes a nice swoop until you get here. You got the frame rail coming out at a weird angle, you got big gaps along here, and that's because there used to be a fender here. When you pull the fenders off, man, you open up all kinds of stuff here. Now, generally the way to fix that is to take the gas tank out, relocate it into the car, and then come in and cut the frame and rock it up or just bob it off altogether. The problem is, remember, that's a rumble seat. I'd rather keep the tank back here than up there in somebody's lap. This would be a little safer. So the good news is there is a way to run a gas tank back here and make this look better. And that's what we're going to show you. These pieces come from Steve's Auto Restoration, and they are handmade filler panels that are designed to put a nice finished edge on the bottom of a deuce body. Now, when you buy these things from Steve, they will actually hand make them to fit your body because they're all a little different. Notice that this is actually 3 pieces all welded together and metal finished out. This is a nice piece of work. All right, here's how they fit. Slide under the body. Now look, you've got a nice edge that rolls all the way down to the frame, nice and smooth. It's tight around the gas tank. That is going to be really cool when it's on. Okay, that's what it does. This is how to put it on. Since the pieces are trimmed to fit, the first step is to mark them and then trim them to fit the body. Now make sure you take your time here because you want the fit to be perfect. Hey, we're back, and right in the middle of welding on these body extensions so we have a nice smooth radius edge here at the bottom of this Roadster body. Now you can bolt these on, you can rivet them on, but that's going to leave you with this horizontal line, and that's not going to look very good. If you weld them on, grind that down, that'll totally disappear and it'll look really good. As with any time you're welding sheet metal, you'll want to use spot welds spaced a few inches apart so you don't overheat the metal and warp it. Just keep adding spot welds until you have a solid, continuous weld. Now, don't expect this to look good. What you're after are penetration and good, solid welds. Now, anytime you're doing this kind of work, clamping things in place is key. And I have got a special clamp to show you right now. Tool Tech, brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. Two of the biggest problems that you're going to face when you are welding sheet metal is clamping two pieces together and filling holes and gaps. And this little guy here from Cornwell Tools is designed to take care of both of those problems. Now, it's got a locking handle, just like a pair of vice grips. Then up here on the business end, you got a little copper pad on one side, and then what looks like a gun sight on the other. Now, what this lets you do is clamp two pieces together, leaving whatever gap that you want to put your weld in, or you can clamp it over a hole and then just come in here and weld it up, because the copper will not stick to the weld. So if you're welding sheet metal, this guy here can make your life a whole lot easier. It can be that third hand you always wish you had. And that is what a good tool is for. Once the welding is done, now comes the grinding. And all you're doing is knocking off the top of the weld and blending it into the panels. I like to start with a flap wheel and then finish it off with a die grinder. All right, the corners are in, but we're not done yet. What about this area right here? That's where this third piece from SAR comes in. Now, it is designed to fill that area. So, using the same techniques, we are going to mount this thing. Man, that's going to be fantastic. See how it's just going to roll down? It's nice. All right, with the gas tank in place, you can start to see now what we're doing. Now, obviously, I still have some finish work to do here. Another round with the welder and the grinder to fill some of these spots. And also, I'm going to come in here and open that gap up to where it's uniform. But take a look at this. Now, the body runs all the way down to the frame. It rolls under, nice finished edge. Going to have a nice, tight, uniform gap around the gas tank. Now, the rear end looks symmetrical. It looks finished. Well, except for one thing. I probably should put some sort of a bumper on this. And that is what this is, some sort of a bumper. This is called a spreader bar, and it just bolts between the frame rails, and it's going to give us some sort of protection to that gas tank. Not a lot, but some. You know, one thing that you're going to find, if you're into modifying cars and trucks at all, and we hope that you are, is that eventually you're going to have to do some floor work, whether you want to or not. And doing floor work is not necessarily something you want to pay somebody to do, because it can be pretty expensive. It's always better to buy the stuff and do it yourself. Now, it might be because the floors are rusted out, or somebody's butchered the vehicle, or maybe you have stuck in an engine and transmission that was never intended to be in that vehicle. Whatever the case, having solid floors is mandatory, because this is what holds your behind in the vehicle. Unfortunately, it's also an area most people are afraid to dig into. So hopefully we're going to change that by showing you how to lay out a floor and put together an interior where there was nothing before. Oh, God. Now, the subject for our surgery today is the rat roaster. And believe it or not, it's very similar to a lot of the car and truck and 4x4 projects that you guys have out there sitting in the garage right now. You've got your chassis together and all laid out, got the body sitting down on top of it, got your engine and drivetrain in, so you're all happening there. But basically, you have a Flintstone mobile because you have no floor in it. And to make matters worse, there's no kit available because it's a unique project. There's no directions, there's no tech line to call for help. No, you are on your own. So what do?
Well, the only thing you can do with a project like this is start at the beginning, decide what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then go from there. And that is what we're going to show you how to do. As you can see with this project, I not only don't have any front floors here, I've also got a massive TKO 5-speed sitting right in the middle that I had to make room for all the way back here into this rear floor. So I've got a lot of stuff to cover up here in the middle. Now, when I lay these floors out, I need to make sure that I cut some slots for my pedals to work correctly. I need to be keeping in mind that I'm going to have some sort of a steering column coming down here. And then I need to make sure I've got some access panels cut in here so I can get to my master cylinders. Then I want it all to be removable so I can take it out and work on stuff if I need to. Yeah, that's a lot of things to do. But now that we know what we want, all we have to do is start knocking these things out one by one. Before you know it, you're going to have some good floors. The first step is to lay out the pattern for the floor panels, and a cardboard template is the way to go here. As you lay this out, make sure that you leave at least a couple inches of clearance around the transmission to allow for movement and servicing. Now this is also where you decide where to make your cuts for your access panels and your pedals. As you're building your templates, make sure that you keep checking the fit, because this is what's going to make or break how well your floors fit. Now, the more time that you spend here working with cheap disposable cardboard, getting it right, the easier it's going to be down the road when you start building it in steel. Once you have it how you want it, then just transfer the shape to some sheet metal. Now, I am using this universal floor from Brookville Roadsters as a starting point, and for my center hump, I'm using this universal kit from Bitchin' Products. Now, the good thing about using these universal kits is that they will at least get you in the ballpark to start with. Once you have it all marked, cut it out. Now, you can use a jigsaw or a cut-off wheel or even a plasma cutter to do this, but I prefer a simple jigsaw because it's quick, it's very maneuverable, and the cuts are extremely clean so you don't have a lot of finished grinding to do. That's just to show you, man, old tools don't ever die. Ever. All right, let's take a look at what we got here. Yeah, we got good clearance around the pedals, got clearance down the side, and access to our master cylinders. Now all we have to do is the other side. And that is it. Now, I know some of you guys are going, man, that was easy. So the floors are done, right? No, you're about halfway done, because look at this. You don't have any strength out there. That's just a flat piece of sheet metal. That's not going to hold anything. You need a lot more than that. The thing that you have to remember when you're building a floor like this where there is nothing before is you have to come from something strong like a cross member all the way to the firewall, and then you bridge that with whatever you're going to do to go over the transmission. And then when you bolt all that stuff together, you're going to have a nice strong structure here that you can actually jump up and down on. Now, to get the strength that we need into this floor pan, what I'm going to do is build a perimeter frame around it using this 1/2-inch square tubing, because it's going to fit right in that pocket really nice. So what we need to do is cut tubing and start laying it in place. Now, some of you guys may be thinking, why in the world do I want to know how to do that? Well, the answer is very simple. No matter what you're working on, whether it be a car or a truck or a 4x4 or a street machine or an old hot rod, if you are sticking a different engine and transmission in it, or you're modifying the rig heavily, or it's rusty, well, chances are you're going to have to build a floor or at least modify the existing floor in it. And if you know how to do this, you can save yourself some serious money. All right, we've already got our floor pans formed and cut. We did that before the break. Now what we're working on is building a framework out of this square tubing that's not only going to support the floor, but it's going to tie the firewall together with this cross member, so we've got a nice strong structure here. Once you're happy with the fit of your tubing, just weld the frame together. Now I'm using a TIG welder on these seams because it is so clean and precise and perfect for this small tubing. However, a MIG welder will work well too. At this point, we've got a couple of frames and a couple of floor pans, and obviously they need to be connected together. But before we do that, we are going to roll some beads in these pans, because not only will that add strength to the pans, but it's going to look really good too. It's going to make these front floors match the floors that are already in the car. So the first thing we're going to do is lay out where we want the beads to go. Now on these particular pans, we're going to put them about 3 inches apart. Then we'll just roll the beads using the bead roller. Now we are finally ready to connect the pan and the frame, and we're going to do that with spot welds. So the first thing you need to do is drill some holes in the pan about 2 inches apart. The final piece is this access panel cover that is going to cover up this opening for the master cylinders. Now, all you have to do is cut this out of a bare piece of sheet metal, and then the trick to making this fit is to flange the edges with one of these flanging tools. Now, let me show you a little trick here. Notice that 3 of the sides are flanged up, 1 side is flanged down. That is so the piece will slide under the pan and lay flush. Look at this, no gaps, nice flush mount. That looks great. Now, the moment of truth. How do they look in the car? Let's check it out. Hopefully, you're gonna have some nice flush mounting floors that match everything else and look like they came from the factory. Yeah, this is cool. Now, the mounting points are here on the side. Gonna drill some more holes in the back so it'll bolt to this cross member. And then drill some holes up here so it'll mount to the firewall, so you're nicely mounted all around. Got the support running down the side, so that will support what you do over the center hump. So now you have a strong floor. Now, if you are going to build your car and put some mirrors up underneath, and you don't want people to see this framework, well, all you've got to do is cut yourself another piece of sheet metal, roll the beads in it, weld it on, and the bottom will look just like the top. That will be slick. That's what I'm going to do to this car. Now, I know you guys are wondering what we're doing with the center hump. Like I said before, I took a universal kit from Bitchin' Products, and I've modified it to where it will clear the transmission, added a piece of steel in here, and it's going to go together like this, and then mount to the supports we put along the sides. That's going to be a nice solid piece. Now, I know you're wondering about this area here. Well, I'm going to have to hand make that, but I'm going to have to wait on that because that's going to tie in with how I do my pocket here for the distributor and what I'm going to do with the gas pedal, because it's all going to mount in here. So we'll take care of that on another day. Now, the next step to laying out a solid interior is a lot easier than building floors, but every bit as important, and that involves laying out your seats. Now, this isn't just bolting some seats in. No, this is also choosing the right seats for your application. Let me show you what I'm talking about. As you can see, the aftermarket is full of all kinds of really cool seats. So the question is, where do you start? Well, you've got to go back to your criteria. Remember, the Rat Roadster is being built as a car that looked like it rolled down the street in 1968. So as cool as all of these high back buckets are, these are just not the right seats. They don't have the right vibe. Now, you can go with an original style bench seat like the Deuce came with. I mean, guys, we're still doing this in '68. But if you wanted a real gear jamming street race and hot rod from that era, man, you had to have bucket seats. Not just something out of a Mustang or a Camaro, racing buckets, like these from Speedway Motors. This is one of Speedway's all-aluminum bomber seats, which has exactly the look and the attitude that we're after. Check this out. It's got holes punched in the back and on the bottom. It's got a nice rolled lip all the way around it. You've got this little lip down here in the front, lightweight aluminum, and it has a 20-degree layback here, so this thing is actually comfortable to sit in. However, we are not putting it in the car just like this. No, a bare bomber seat is more of a late 50s look. To hit our era, we have got to have some upholstery on this, and that is sitting right over here. Trent from Trent's Trick Upholstery is one of the premier interior guys in the business. So I sent him a rendering of what I wanted. He stitched up some really cool vintage covers. Take a look. Now, he started with heavy-duty vinyl that looks like distressed leather, and then he stitched up this top that snaps all the way around the perimeter. Then he built this seat cushion. It snaps in place on this lip in the front, so it not only looks really cool, it also gives me some padding for those long trips. Then, of course, the crowning jewel is the diamond pattern. I mean, there's nothing more 60s hot rod than that. Now, I know some of you guys are wondering how Trent got this padding around the sides and across the back. We're going to show you how he put these things together. He started out with a wire screen to prevent the foam from coming through the holes. Then he custom formed a foam pad to cover and contour the back and sides. We'll just hold that in place with a little 3M adhesive. Then the custom stitch cover slides down over the seat back and the foam and just snaps in place. Follow that with the seat cushion and you are ready to go. Now the question is, how do you mount those seats in that vehicle and still have them sit right and be adjustable? Well, obviously, you need some seat tracks. So we got these universal seat tracks from Summit Racing, and as you can see, they're not too bad the way they sit. But if you are going to spend this much time and this much effort building something like this, you don't want not bad. You want them to fit right, you want it to look right. So, as you can see, it'd be a lot nicer if that seat track fit underneath the seat a little bit, kind of hide it. And then, of course, you got this big long piece back here that just looks goofy, so that needs to be shortened. So what we're going to do is modify this seat track so it custom fits this seat. Here's how to do it. The first step is to narrow the track by cutting 1 inch out of the center supports. Then we'll whack 1.5 inches off those rear posts. Follow that up by welding it all back together. Grinding it down. Now, I know that these changes are subtle. Seems like a lot of work for some subtle changes. But trust me, it's going to make a big difference. Check this out. Yeah, that's more like it. Now that seat frame now fits the seat perfectly. Now all we have to do is bolt the seat to the frame and get the whole assembly into the car. Okay, positioning a seat can be a little time consuming because the first thing you want to make sure is that you're not sitting too high. Ideally, you want to look right through the center of the windshield. Now keep in mind we got a 2-inch chop here, so I'm going to be sitting lower in this car than you normally would, which is another reason why the bench seat would not have been a good choice here. Now, as you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're centered over your pedals and where your steering column is going to be.
Here's my marks for the steering column, so we're doing all right there. Getting pretty close. You also want to remember where your transmission is, where your shifter's going to come up, and how you're going to clear your door when you're working your pedals. You don't want to get too far this way. While you're doing that, you want to make sure that you've got your full range of motion for the seat so you can pull it back and forward if you need to do that. So you can see there's a lot of stuff to do here. Be prepared to spend some time. Now, once you have it all dialed in the way you want it, it's just a matter of bolting it down to the floor, and you are going to have a one-of-a-kind floor and seating setup. It's going to have the look that you want, but it's going to have the usability and adjustability that you need. That is great. Now, the next time that you see the Rat Roadster, we're going to start putting some stuff on here and tying it into other iconic things from '68 that are going to make it truly unique and definitely the baddest thing in the valley. All right, let's get a little ventilation here. There we go. Now, this is kind of a tough era because hot rods were starting to take a backseat to muscle cars at this point. That's why our criteria is very specific. Most important, got to be able to run at least the mid-12s in street form. That would make it fast enough to be able to spank just about any muscle car running on the road at the time. Then it needs to handle and stop well, be reliable enough for daily use, and that is by today's standards, not by 1968. Then, of course, it needs to be reasonably affordable, best bang for the buck, which means you have to build it yourself. Then, of course, it has to be really cool, and that means it's got to be unique. Got to be different than everything else that you see out there. Can't be another cookie cutter 32. Now, as you can see, so far, we are right on the money. We've got a blown small block Chevy kicking out close to 600 horsepower, a TKO 5-speed, side pipes with header dumps, cheater slicks with ET wheels, and of course, diamond-stitched racing seats. But as cool as it is, it's still not unique enough to blow everybody's minds and make them all take notice when you drive into a burger joint. So, today we're going to show you how to step beyond what you buy and stretch it into something that you make yourself. Okay, the first thing we're going to deal with is the shifter. Now, obviously, we could just bolt on an arm and a knob and be done with it.
That was easy.
That's also very boring. So, what we're going to do is build something that actually fits the era a little better. Something that's part rock and roll, part James Bond. Come on. I found the perfect shift knob in my collection of vintage microphones. Not only is it a real mic, but it actually fits your hand really well. Now the challenge is to make it fit. The first step was to determine just exactly where I wanted the shifter to sit, and a bent-up piece of coat hanger is perfect for this. Then it was just a matter of transferring the shape to some steel and cutting it out.
Heck, I've lost count.
Number 5. I believe that's 6. There we go. There. Next, we'll modify the microphone to fit the shift arm. And in just a short period of time, this is what you've got. Now that is a cool shifter. And all we gotta do is chrome the handle, this thing's ready to go in a car. Now, you're probably wondering about this little wire hanging out here. Now that's because inside I'm gonna mount the switches for my exhaust cutouts, so when I flip the switch, the car gets louder. Just like James Bond, man. The cool thing is you can do this with a doorknob or a kegger handle, whatever you want your shifter knob to be. But if you want a vintage microphone, you're going to be in trouble because these are not out there. So we went to the guys at Purple Hazen to see if they could make something like this that you guys could get. And using this as a prototype, that's exactly what they did. Let's check it out. Starting with a CNC program of the original microphone, an exact replica of the mic as well as the shifter handle were whittled out of aluminum and then polished. Then the wiring harness for the exhaust cutouts was modified to fit into the microphone. Check this out. The face rotates out of the way and you've got two little buttons hidden inside, one to operate the exhaust cutout on each side of the car. This would be the perfect place to also hide a line lock or a nitrous button or whatever you'd want to hide. Then, of course, take a look at this. The wiring runs out the back and is hidden in a groove until everything goes under the shifter boot, so nobody is going to know this is there except you. Now, to go with the handle, we also got one of their high-performance short-throw shifters, so we can really lay into that transmission. So we got the performance of the shifter, we have the looks of the handle, and then we have that sneaky thing going on there too. So we are covering all the bases here. The best part is you can get one of these to fit your car. All you got to do is call it Purple Hazing, tell them you want one. All right, we're going to put this on the car, see how it looks. Oh man, that is so cool. And you talk about unique. Now that is something that nobody is going to have seen before. And look at this, it's right where it needs to be. Come off the steering wheel right to the shifter. It's right close to your leg, but not hitting it. This is perfect. Now, with this out of the way, we've got to get some gauges in this thing. But not just any gauges. Now, it needs to be a company that would have been around back then. And I have got just the gauges sitting right over there. SoCal Speed Shop has been doing stuff like this since 1946. And we got our gauges from another speed shop that's been around almost as long, Honest Charlie's Speed Shop. If you were building a hot rod in the late 60s, you probably got parts from SoCal Speed Shop or Honest Charlie's. Now, take a look at these gauges. These are really cool. You got the SoCal logo in them. The tack goes to 10 grand. You got volts, you got water. Your speedometer goes all the way to 200. Now, if we hit 200 in that car, that's going to be a ride now, believe me. Look at this. We also have oil, we have fuel, and then you've got all the sending units to hook these things up and make them work right. Now, instead of just drilling the dash and bolting these things in like they are in the box here, we needed something more special than that. So, we got this instrument panel that not only mounts all 6 gauges, but it also has this insert that's made out of genuine Fender pick guard material. Just in case you didn't know, Fender guitars were red hot in the late 60s. We're going to talk about that a lot more later in the show. But as you can see, this is going to make that dash just pop. To mount a SoCal Speed Shop instrument panel, the first thing you have to do is cut a big chunk out of the dash. But that's not a problem because it comes with a cutting template so you don't end up butchering the dash. With the edges all cleaned up, now it's just a matter of dropping the panel into the opening and bolting it in place with the supplied brackets. Now, I know it seems like kind of a pain to have to cut your dash like this, but the thing that makes this panel so unique is that it not only mounts the gauges behind the dash for a cool 3-dimensional look, but it also angles the gauges up toward the driver so they're easier to see. That is much better than just mounting them flat like a lot of the other panels on the market. Now, it gets even better when you stick in your Fender pickguard material and then start putting in your gauges. And that is it. Now, take a look at that. That is an awesome looking dash. And when you add to it the microphone shifter, you got some cool stuff happening here. A great blend of hot rod and rock and roll. Now, on that note, got one more thing I'm going to show you that we're doing here. This is a vintage Ludwig Speed King bass drum kick pedal, and I'm going to use that as my gas pedal. Now, what I'm going to do is take the pedal part and combine it with this low car pedal to create a very unique gas pedal. And I can't think of anything more fitting for a late 60s hot rod than to have a gas pedal that says Speed King. Now, obviously I can't put this on right now. I got to finish the hump there for the transmission, but at least you get an idea of where I'm going with this. Okay, moving outside the car, we come to one area that definitely needs to be dealt with, the fenders, or in this case, the lack of fenders. Now, I know everybody is building fenderless cars for 2 different reasons. Number 1, it's cheaper. Number 2, it's easier. And it looks great. If you're building a late 40s, early 50s car, it's perfect. But by the late 60s, it was illegal not to have fenders on your car, and the cops were watching. So what guys did is take the fenders and cut them down or bob them. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to go bobbing for fenders. Now, anytime you're custom building a fender, it's always a good idea to at least start with something as opposed to totally starting from scratch.
So we got a couple of slightly damaged fenders from Brookfield Roadsters, since we're just gonna cut them up anyway. All right, with the stock fender mocked into place, now it's time to decide how you're gonna cut that fender. Now, the idea back in the late 60s was to cut away as much of the fender as possible and to still stay out of jail. Now, the law said that all of the tread had to be covered, but most cops back in the day would let you off with a warning if you had as much as a third of the tread showing. So that's the look we're gonna go after. About a third of the tread sticking out. Now, when you're establishing your cut line, it's really up to you how you want the fender to look. Just make sure it flows well into the body. With the cut lines established, it's time to take the plunge and start cutting. Once your cuts are done, the next step is to true up the edges. Now, back in the day when guys were bobbing fenders like this is pretty much where they stopped. The problem is, you got a cool radius starting here on the fender, and then it just stops right there with a straight cut. Looks unfinished. So what I'm gonna do is go to work on this with a power hammer and work that radius in so this looks more like a factory fender, just smaller. Starting to get a little more radius down in here. Now that is more like it. Now check it out. Notice how the fender blends right into the base of the body. Then up here it radiuses more, curves down more toward the tire. Then we finished it off by rolling a bead in it. Now this is subtle stuff that makes such a big difference. Today's show was all about those little details that you can do to just about any vehicle to make it unique and different than anything else out there on the road. All you need is some parts and some imagination. Now, a perfect vehicle to demonstrate that on is the Rat Roadster, because there are a million 32s running down the road, so it's a little bit of a challenge to build one that's different. It doesn't look like everything else, but it is possible. That's what we're showing you. Now, obviously, there is a lot of musical influence built into this car. That's because the music scene was huge in the late 60s. So I hooked up with the Gibson Custom Shop, and we built a special Rat Roadster guitar to go with the car. Custom headers and all. Starting with the iconic Gibson ES335, I started cutting and chopping away in true hot rod fashion. With the body thoroughly cut up, the next step was to start fabricating a header that would flow with the body. Once that was done, the body was then sanded and radiused so there were no gaps, no binding, no sharp edges. We want it smooth. Finally, the guitar was ready for paint, and Malcolm and the boys from West Kentucky Collision Center got the nod to work their magic on it. After that, it went back to the Gibson Custom Shop where they did the final assembly on it, and here it is, a custom Hot Rod 335 that has a stainless steel exhaust system built right into the body. Is that cool or what? Now, a lot of you guys have been wondering what color were we gonna do the Rat Roadster? And this has been kind of tough because I needed something that matched the look in the era, but I also wanted to stay away from your typical hot rod colors like black and red and yellow. So I hooked up with Ron Payton at PPG, and we came up with this killer metallic green. Now, if you look close at that, you will swear that that is a candy color, like a green over a silver base, but it's not. It is a base clear coat, so just about anybody can paint this color. Now, if you want some of this color, you can get it at Auto Body Color and Supply in Nashville, Tennessee. The color is called Rat Roadster Green, and we'll also have the paint code listed on the website if you want to mix some up yourself. Okay, and looking at the era that we're shooting for, you might be wondering, why a Gibson? Well, in 1969, the #1 rock group in America was named Creedence Clearwater Revival, and the sound of Gibson's on the record was unmistakable. However, in spite of that, and the fact that you could really rock on one of these things, The #1 guitar player in 1969 was not a Gibson player. He played a Fender. His name was Jimi Hendrix. And we had the honor of sitting down with his longtime friend and bass guitar player, Billy Cox.
He said, that's all right. I'll make it. I'll go to Europe and make it, and I'll send for you. 2.5 years later, he sent for me. And my first gig was Woodstock. He played the Star Spangled Banner. And if you hear on the DVD, I played for the first 9 notes. And then I said, wait a minute, there's no one playing but me and him. And this was not rehearsed. So I had better lay out. And when I did, that was history.
Since Jimi Hendrix and Billy Cox were such a huge part of the late 60s, it was only fitting that we include them in the buildup of the Rat Roadster. And what I'd love to have is a Billy Cox pick and a Jimi Hendrix pick.
You got it.
That I can put on the dash, cover with clear coat, so they'll permanently be on here. Can I get
You got
that?
it. I got a few at home.
Can I get you to sign my dash and stuff?
Sign your dash.
The best part is, I had a chance to sit down with Billy and jam on a few of the tunes that he's putting together for his latest project, The Last Gypsy Stand-In. And I tell you, at 70 years old, he can still play as good as he ever could. So, we have a little bit of Gibson, we have a little bit of Fender, we got a whole lot of musical history woven into this project. Now, I know some of you guys are probably wondering, is this going to become a limited edition Gibson like the Copperhead and Crazy Horse guitars? Well, it's a good possibility, but Gibson wants to hear from you. So you got to go to Gibson.com and tell them that you want a Rat Roadster 335. And I bet they'll build you one, but it's not going to be as fast as mine. Now, at this point, the car was ready for paint and upholstery. So, got in touch with my old buddy, Doug LaRue, who had just started a new school called the Hot Rod Institute. He wanted us to check it out. So we did. The Hot Rod Institute is located in Rapid City, South Dakota, and what you see in the parking lot is just a small taste of what you're going to find inside. Those are pretty serious C-notches, man. I like that.
Gotta go all the way down.
First thing that you immediately notice is the scope and the depth of the students' projects.
Hot Rod Institute rocks!
These are not simple little scratch and dent cars. These are full-on chop, channel, and design projects, way beyond the skill level of what you would normally find in a technical school. And that's the whole point behind the Hot Rod Institute. Besides himself, Doug has gathered together some of the best instructors in the country to teach the students the art and the craftsmanship of chassis design, custom body modifications, custom upholstery work, performance engine building, paint and body work, and anything else that might have to do with cars or engines or motorcycles.
It took me 30+ years to get it over, to get to the point where I'm at, where these guys can come and take it, a year, year and a half, and they can have a good start on it.
So, not only does the Hot Rod Institute teach an incredibly high skill level and give the students a tremendous amount of hands-on experience, but they also have a professional rod shop right there on the campus. And they allow the graduating students to apprentice there and gain that valuable experience of working in a professional shop. And that is where the Rat Roadster comes in. Now, as you can see, this car looks a lot different than the last time you saw it, thanks to the guys at the Hot Rod Institute. Now, normally you would be insane to let a bunch of students touch a car like this. But, like we've already shown you, the Hot Rod Institute is not your typical tech school, and it doesn't have your typical instructors, which means the students don't get just a typical education. And to prove that, I decided to let Doug and his guys do the paint and the interior on the Rat Roadster to showcase the school, good or bad, on national TV. Let's take a look and see how they did. The special Rat Roadster green paint is a base coat clear coat PPG color created by Ron Payton and myself, and the paint and materials was supplied by Diversified Auto right there in Rapid City. The body was worked to perfection and then shot with color And then it was cut and buffed until the car looks like a big piece of Jolly Ranchers sour apple candy. Now the hood, oh, that's something you haven't seen yet. And it was a little tricky because I wanted a functional 4-piece style hood, but it had to be convertible. So I could run the car totally without a hood, or with just a hood top, or with the full hood like you see here. The problem is, I've got side pipes, which I'm going to keep, and I've got louvers that I want to keep. So, starting with a 4-piece stock hood, here's what they did. Zeus fasteners hold the top in place and allow easy access to the engine. The sides of the hood are bolted in place, and they've been modified to fit nice and tight around the header. Now, there's a lower panel underneath the header that slides into the hood side to give you that full hood look, but it still allows easy removal of the side panel. Now, instead of having traditional louvers on the hood, you remember that old 56 Buick I pulled out of a junkyard? Yeah. Well, we sliced the portholes out of the fenders, shipped them off to Doug where he tightened them up and grafted them into the hood top for a totally cool, totally unique look. Now, obviously the inserts still need to be re-chromed, but you get the idea. Okay, to go with the convertible idea of the hood, we got a couple of air cleaner systems from K&N. Now, you already saw the little ones that go on when I'm running a hood. But when I take the hood off, I got these big old velocity stacks, so we got some serious hot rod attitude here. Not only that, but I've got the look that I want in either situation, and I've got plenty of air sucking down into that supercharger. The front fenders were finished up and painted like the rest of the car, and they not only add to the cool late 60s vibe, but like the hood, they are completely removable if I ever want to run this car fenderless. The Moon tank is something that I got from Honest Charlie's Speed Shop, and I know you think that it's just going to be for looks, right? No, it's going to hold racing fuel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plumb it into my fuel line using an electric valve, so all I got to do is flip a switch, and I'm running on racing fuel. You know, just in case I need it. All right, the interior of a Roadster can pose some interesting challenges if you're trying to do something different. Now, most people will stick an original style bench seat in here, and that'll cover up all this open area behind the seats. But if you're not doing it that way, you got a lot of area here that you've got to do something about. Here is what we did. The guys fabricated some door panels and a matching rear panel out of metal to fill in that open area behind the seats. Everything was punched with holes to establish a cool look that matches the Lucara steering wheel, the I Did It steering column, and the microphone shifter. Of course, the panels were upholstered in the same diamond tough pattern as the bomber seats for a classic hot rod look. A small console was fabricated to hold junk like speeding tickets, and the e-brake handle is tucked below it, out of the way. The carpet, like the seat upholstery, was designed to snap in place for easy access to the floor panels and the master cylinders beneath them. The Diamond Tuck look continues back into a matching rumble seat because any hot rod has got to have a place to carry passengers. The metalwork was completed by finishing off the bobbed fenders and then building a custom license plate box between the taillights. Now, the finishing touch is some custom lettering and pinstriping to remind everybody what this thing is that they're looking at. So what do you think? Did they pull it off? Yeah, I'll say they did. Now here's a shot of Doug and all the guys that worked on the car. And as you can see, they are proud of their work, and they should be. Now, after seeing this, if you think that you'd like to go to school to learn how to do this sort of stuff, then there should be no doubt that the Hot Rod Institute should be the first school you check out. So now I guess the big question is it done? Is it time to finally turn the key on this thing and drive it down the road? Unfortunately, not quite. I still have some wiring to hook up, got some plumbing to do, got to put a top on it, and have to do an exhaust system. And we're going to take care of that in later shows. But there's still some things that I want to show you today that we've done to this car that make it really unique. For example, there's the music connection with the vintage microphone shifter and the hidden exhaust cutouts, the Fender pick guard material in the dash panel, the Billy Cox and Jimi Hendrix guitar picks, and of course the wild Gibson 335 that I built with the Gibson Custom Shop. Next, we hooked up with the guys at GMP Diecast, and they're in the process of building a 1/25th scale, incredibly detailed replica of the Rat Roadster, and we'll let you know when those become available.
It's a great project, and we'll definitely exercise every capability we have to make it happen.
I want one. I want a model.
Yeah, I want a model of it.
Yeah. Well, there's 3 of them.
Yeah, there's 3
right there. We're on the way.
We need 997 more.
Now at this point, hopefully you're thinking, man, this is really cool. But there is one other thing going on with this car that we want to share with you. Nashville music producer, certified car nut, and rock and roll historian Danny White has just written his first novel, and it is called The Last Rock and Roll Show. Now, this is a story about 2 kids that secretly tape Buddy Holly's last show in Clear Lake, Iowa, and then they end up on this wild chase across the nation, racing vintage hot rods and trying to stay ahead of the feds. I mean, it's an awesome story, and you can buy the book right on our website, gearstv.com. But the really cool thing is, you are already familiar with one of the cars in the book. If you'll notice the cover, yeah, that's the Rat Roadster, and it plays a major part in this story. But not just that. You see this old burned up Dodge? Yeah, it plays a major role in the story too. Now, if you're wondering how this thing got burned to the ground with its early Hemi and 6 deuces, and how the Rat Roadster fits into all of it, well, you're gonna have to read the book. I'm not gonna tell you. You know, one of the best things about a 32 Ford Roadster is the fact that it's topless. Oh, this is great. However, one of the worst things about a 32 Ford Roadster is the fact that it's topless, especially if you drive the car a lot and live in an area where it rains. Now, there are aftermarket tops available, but unfortunately they're all the type that you have to disassemble or lift off and store somewhere, and that becomes a real pain real quick. Now, the original 32 Ford Roadster had a folding convertible top, and that's the way to go so you can enjoy the car no matter what the weather's doing. So we hooked up with our buddies at Superior Car Parts because they specialize in chopped, folding convertible tops for 32 Roadsters.
We're finding out that we're the only people in the world that we can find that are making true steel folding tops in the design of the original Ford, but adapted to fit in the hot rod world.
The first step is to assemble the sidearm assemblies and connect them to the windshield posts. Next comes the middle bow, which is made out of hardened oak. Now you simply fit it in place, then drill it, then mount it to the side pieces. With that done, it's on to the rear bow, which is a little more involved.
On an original Ford, the top actually went up.
Oh, yeah.
And then straight down, actually slanting forward toward the car.
That's goofy looking.
Right, that's antique car looking.
Yeah.
So now, because the top of this iron stops here, we can just keep going down and down and down and down.
Now the idea here is to set the rear bow to the height that looks good with the slope of the top to the windshield. A strip of masking tape is a good way to gauge just how the top is going to look. Since the Rat Roadster has a 3-inch chopped windshield, the rear bow is going to have to be cut and slightly modified so it'll sit low enough to look good. The last piece to go on is the front header, and you've got a top ready for upholstery.
You know, that's got such a great rake to it. This is great though. You got headroom.
The primary distinction is that our tops fold as they were designed from the factory. They fold, they unhook from the windshield and fold to the back of the car and stay with you.
With the final assembly of the Rat Roadster underway, the one area that we still needed to address was the exhaust system. And since everything about the Rat Roadster exhaust is unique, we hooked up with our buddies at Cherry Bomb to lay out an exhaust system that would not only fit the look and the style of the car, but also have the sound that we're after.
You know, if we had room here, obviously we could run a pipe out of that hole. So that kind of changes things up a little bit.
But you can bend it tight enough to bring it down this direction, right?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, with mandrel bending, you can really tighten that radius up and bring them straight out.
How about mufflers? I mean, the glass pack would be awful cool.
Yeah, to me, a car like this, it's got to have glass packs on it.
You know, maybe something like this, or were you bringing the tubing out through there?
We could run through the hole here into that, or we can use a little bit shorter glass pack. This is like an 18-inch. Maybe go with a 12-inch. You know,
that thing up there?
To me, it just works perfect with this car.
Oh yeah. This obviously needs some support there. Have you got some sort of a rubber mount or something that you can support that, or would do it through the tubing? How would you?
Yeah, I would probably recommend we'll make a support here in the frame and maybe tie it into the header adapter coming off here.
Okay. And you got that flange there that you can work off of.
Yeah, we can work off that too. And we have some nice high temperature rubber grommets we can use to put in there to hold that on.
Blue ones?
Yeah, those are nice. So it definitely needs support because you'll crack your header wells up here if you don't.
All right, the exhaust system's laid out under the car. Let's take a look at it. The exhaust comes down through the header, and when the cutout is closed, the exhaust goes out the side, through the notches in the frame that we made earlier, and then it goes through the X-member and into two tiny little glass pack mufflers to give us the right rumble that we need. And then the exhaust continues up over the rear axle and ends up in two chrome slash-cut tips that are right under the frame rails for a nice, clean, stealthy look. You know, if you ask any gearhead what their favorite part of any project is, most are gonna tell you it's those big moments, like the first time you rolled a project in, or when you stuffed a new engine in, or when you finally turned that key the first time. And there's no doubt, these are great times. But there's a whole lot more to building a car than that, because there's a lot of work that's involved in bringing all those big moments together to where you actually have something that'll start and stop and run like a car should. And that is where most projects come to a screeching halt, because either the person didn't plan for all that, they didn't know how involved it was, or they just don't know how to do it. So today we're going to help you out with that as we dig into the final assembly of the Rat Roadster and deal with some of the problems that can come up no matter what you're working on. Okay, the first thing you're probably wondering about is the top on this car, because the last time you saw it, it was just a bare frame that we got from Superior Car Parts. From there, it went to Midwest Hot Rods, where they put the upholstery on it. As you can see, it looks really good. Now, as you can see, this top not only has a 3-inch chop that looks really mean, but it also looks a lot different than most of the tops out there, because the upholstery comes all the way back to here, exposing all this wood and metal, which is really cool. However, if you're building an all-weather car, this is a lot of open space to have on a car that's probably gonna get caught in a rainstorm. So we had the guys at Midwest Hot Rods build us some custom side curtains to go on here. Check it out. The rear section of the curtain just snaps to the rear of the top. Then the window section just slides into the door and snaps in place. This allows the curtain to stay with the door when it opens and seal against the top when it closes, leaving you snug and dry when it's raining. But the best part about a Superior Car Parts top is that it folds back like the original. Is that cool or what? Look at that. Now, some of you might be looking at it going, yeah, that is cool, but I'm not sure about all this stuff piled back here. It kind of looks like a jalopy a little bit. Well, if that bothers you, all you have to do is pull out one bolt here, one bolt there, and the whole top will lift off, which is very similar to most of the aftermarket tops out there. But one thing those tops can't do is this. All right, you all unhooked? I am. Let's go. All right, that takes care of the top. Now we're gonna move on to the steering. Now, one thing that's important to remember, whatever choices that you make when you're building your vehicle, those can cause some unique challenges when you're doing your final assembly. For example, the fact that we put a supercharger on this engine means that we had to mount the engine a couple inches further back than you normally would, so you'd have room for the fan and the radiator. That meant that we had to build a pocket into the firewall here to have room for the distributor. Another issue with a supercharged engine that's going to be running a full hood, about the only place that you can mount the alternator is right here on the driver's side down low. Of course, since we moved the engine back a couple inches, that area is now filled up with a steering box. Here's how we're going to solve it. The solution comes from a place called Unisteer Performance Products and their cross-steer rack and pinion style steering system for early hot rods featuring a solid axle. Now this is your typical Vega style steering. You got your Vega box, got your pitman arm, and of course you got your drag link. Now as you can see, the Vega box is fairly good sized and it's going to steer like a 70s Vega. The Unisteer system not only gives you the benefits of rack and pinion, but it also comes with a special bracket that's going to bolt right in place of your Vega box. Now, as you can see, it's a much smaller, lower profile, so you're going to have a lot more room up against the frame. And it's completely compatible with all the U-joints and shafts that are out there on the market. So if you want to convert an early hot rod to rack and pinion style steering, Unisteer's the way to go. Watch how easy this goes in. And that's all there is to it. You got more room, you got rack and pinion steering, and it's all hidden up underneath so it doesn't mess up the look of a traditional car. Now, another issue that can rear its head from time to time with a solid axle car is the shimmy or wobble that can happen when you hit certain bumps just right. Railroad tracks are notorious for doing this. You can keep that from happening though if you put on a steering stabilizer bar from SoCal Speed Shop. Now, these are designed for these style hot rods with early style suspension, and it bolts right here to the tie rod in the middle and over here to the lower radius arm on the passenger side, and it keeps that shimmy from happening. Now, a lot of people don't use these, they don't think they need them. 9 times out of 10, you don't need it. But if you're gonna drive your car at freeway speeds or take it down the drag strip, this is a smart thing to do. Now, like we've said before, the amount of time that you spend here in the final assembly is absolutely going to make or break what you end up with, because this is where it becomes a real operating vehicle. Remember, engines don't run without gas or electrical, and brakes don't work without fluid. So you need to be part electrician and part plumber to pull all this off. But it is something that you can do, and we're going to prove it to you as we finish up the brakes on the Rat Roadster. Okay, the first thing that you need to decide on any brake project is what kind of lines are you going to use, regular steel or stainless steel, because they both require different tools and hardware to do. Take a look. Regular steel brake line like this is pretty much what you'll find at any auto parts store. It's easy to bend, it's cheap, it's easy to flare. It requires a 45-degree double flare, and it connects to brass fittings that you can get pretty much anywhere. This is what you're going to find that comes stock on most vehicles. Now, stainless steel, on the other hand, has the benefits of being more durable, it's not going to rust, and you can polish it out, so it's going to look a lot better than a regular steel line. The drawback of running stainless steel, however, is that it takes a special AN fitting, and that requires putting a 37-degree single flare on the brake line, which means you have to invest in a lot of special AN fittings like these we got from Earl's Plumbing. Now, all of that means running stainless steel is a lot more expensive. Of course, the next question is, what if you want to run regular steel lines with braided stainless steel hoses? Well, fortunately, Stainless Steel Brake Corporation has got a kit that's got all the fittings that will allow you to run regular steel lines as your hard lines. Then they've got an adapter here that adapts everything to a 37-degree AN fitting, which allows you to run the braided stainless steel hoses. Then, of course, it runs down to a final AN fitting that goes to the brake caliper. So as you can see, no matter what your dilemma, the aftermarket's got a solution for you. You just need to decide which way you want to go. Now, some of you guys are looking at this going, man, 37-degree flares and 45-degree flares, how do I do that?
Tool Tech, brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals.
Today's Tool Tech is about flaring tools and how to use them properly. Because if you screw up the flares on your lines, it doesn't matter how good they look, they're going to leak like crazy. Now, like we said before, a regular steel line takes a 45-degree double flare. So you're going to need a tool kit that's going to allow you to do this. This is how to use it. With the line cut and deburred, slide it into the flaring tool. Use the collar on the adapter to set the depth. Then put a dab of lube on the adapter and slide it into the tubing with the stub on the inside. Next, install the vise and crank it till it stops. At this point, you're halfway there. As you can see, the inside of the tube has started to fold in on itself, and now all we have to do is finish it off. So just stick the vise back on and crank it down till it stops, and you'll end up with a perfect double flare. Hopefully you remembered to put the nut on before you did this. Stainless steel, on the other hand, cannot be double flared. It will split on you. So it needs to be single flared, but only to 37 degrees, which means that you have to invest in a completely different flaring tool. We got this one from Speedway Motors. Now, as you can see, it's very simple. You just slide the tubing into the jig,
and then square it up to where the tubing is flush with the face of the jig and tighten it up. Then just slide on the flaring tool and tighten it till it stops. The result is a 37-degree single flare, and this is how it seals against the taper of an AN fitting. Now, to support the back of that flare, you have this little collar that is then followed up with the aluminum nut that tightens everything together and gives you a leak-proof seal. The lines are all formed and in place. We have a proportioning valve here for adjusting the rear brakes. As you can see, I use just regular steel line, not the stainless steel line. And then because the brake calipers sit higher than the master cylinder, we've got residual valves front and rear to keep the fluid from flowing back down into the master cylinder when you're not using the brakes. So the only thing we have left to do is fill the system with fluid and bleed it. And that is where you're going to wish that you had one of these brake bleeders from Phoenix Systems. This allows you to pump the fluid in at the calipers, forcing it up through the lines. And that just pushes all the air up and out the master cylinder. So you're basically filling and bleeding the system at the same time. All right, the brake system is in and bled, the exhaust system is in, but we still got a lot of room under the car because there's no drive shaft in there yet. Now, what you're leaning against there is about 600 horsepower. So we're gonna have to have something that will handle the job, and that is sitting right over there. This is from Denny's Drive Shafts, and it's what they call their heavy-duty 3-inch shaft. Now, it's got all the good stuff. You've got a forged Spicer slip yoke on the front, super strong maintenance-free U-joints, and the whole thing has been high-speed balanced up to 8,000 RPM, so vibration's not gonna be a problem. And like all of Denny's shafts, if you twist it or break a weld, he'll replace it for free. I have been trying to destroy one of Denny's shafts for years and haven't done it yet. Okay, the brakes, the exhaust, the pedals, the steering, all that stuff is done. So the next thing on the list is the fuel system. Now, as you can see, we got two big old Holley 4 barrels up here and a Holley HP mechanical pump down here. And together, that's gonna feed more fuel into this beast than we care to think about right now. So the question is, what fuel line do we use? And you've got some decisions to make. Come on. Of course, the cheap way out is to go down to your local auto parts store, pick up some rubber hose and some clamps, and be done with it. The problem is, this looks terrible. It's not gonna last very long because it's not heat resistant, it's not abrasion resistant, and it's not gonna hold up well to today's ethanol-based fuels. So, we recommend you use this on your lawnmower, not on a performance car or truck. Now, a step up from this is this ProFlex hose from Earl's. As you can see, it has a rubber liner on the inside and then a woven sheath on the outside for strength and protection. This is a great way to go if you're on a budget. If that's not strong enough, you can step up to this PerformaFlex hose from Earl's. As you can see, it also has a rubber liner on the inside and has braided stainless steel on the outside for superior strength. And of course, both these sort of hoses have their own fittings to help them seal up. Now, as good as this stuff is, it still has a rubber liner on the inside, so it is eventually gonna break down and you're gonna have to replace it, although not near as quickly as something like this. Now, if you don't wanna ever replace hose again, you need to step up to the SpeedFlex hose from Earl's. Now, this looks like the PerformaFlex, but inside, it has got a Teflon liner, which is never gonna break down. It basically lasts forever. Then, of course, it's got the stainless steel braiding for superior strength. Now, it's got its own special fitting, too, to help it seal up.
Now, as you probably guessed, as you move up the table, the price of the hose goes up too. So you need to decide what is going to work best for your project. Now for us, for a vehicle that's going to make some runs down the drag strip, we are going to use the Speed Flex. To build your hose, cut it to length. A bandsaw, a hacksaw, or a cutoff wheel works best. And then slide on the fittings and tighten them down. Now be prepared to get stabbed a few times by the stainless steel braid.
Good.
Dang it. Oh, dang it. For fittings, we've got Earl's classic red and blue fittings because that's what would have been on a 60s hot rod. And it's a good idea to use a fuel filter before the fuel pump and one after. So take this into consideration when you're laying out the system. All right, accessories are next. And on this car, we only need a couple. But they need to be powerful and they need to be small. So we went to Tough Stuff Performance, picked up one of their mini alternators that packs a ton of power into the smallest package possible. Then for a starter, we got one of their high torque starters, so turning that engine is never going to be a problem. Now, of course, the starter, direct bolt in. The alternator, on the other hand, required fabricating a custom mount so it would clear the steering box, still be adjustable, and allow us to fit a hood too. With the wiring all done, we are ready for some power. We're going to get that from one of these Optima yellow top deep cycle batteries. Now, this thing's going to fit right inside of this bitchin' battery box. Now, the cool thing about the box is it is designed specifically for an Optima battery, and it's going to allow us to mount that battery nice and tight back into that rumble seat area. You know, the next time I do one of these, I am going to leave more room back here. All right, before you try to start your engine the first time, you need to make sure it's protected. Even if it's been broken in before, if it's been sitting for a while, you need to take some extra precautions. So for oil, we're using this engine break-in oil from Royal Purple. Now this is specifically designed to break an engine in. It's got high levels of zinc and phosphorus to protect your bearings and your cam during that break-in period. Then after about 500 miles, you drain this out, put in your normal oil. One of the final touches that we're going to do to the interior is slide in these custom floor mats from Stylin' Trucks. Now the cool thing about this is, all you have to do is send them a pattern, they'll make the mats for you. And it's a great way to customize your vehicle. Now I know you're probably looking at all the little things that needs to be done to a project and going, man, it's never going to end. But I promise you, if you keep at it, one of these days you're going to look at your list and that sucker's going to be all marked off. And then, finally, you can sit down and relax for a few minutes and then reach for those keys. You know, one of the biggest challenges of building a vehicle from the ground up is keeping it on track and true to your original vision, especially if the project takes a few years to complete. Now, we spent a lot of time walking you through the buildup of the Rat Roadster, and there's no question the car looks good. But the real question is, did we build the car we set out to build? Did we hit our goals? Well, let's see. Does this car look like something from the late 60s? Well, with the candy green paint, the diamond tuft interior, the blown small block engine, and the side pipes and the cutouts, this car would have definitely grabbed everybody's attention at the local burger joint in the late 60s. Number 2, would it spank a vintage muscle car back in the day? Yeah. All right. Well, with over 580 horsepower on tap, a pause rear end, 5 forward gears, and almost no weight, we're going to have trouble keeping this car out of the 10s, let alone running the 12s. Hey, I'm looking for a really bad 55 Chevy. Number 3, is it reliable and usable? Well, the handling and braking are far better than they were back in 1932, even though the front suspension is very similar to what rolled off the assembly line. Making modern upgrades like rack and pinion steering and disc brakes make a world of difference in handling without sacrificing the vintage look that we were after. When you add to that a full top, a hood, and a very street-friendly drivetrain, you really could drive this car anywhere, anytime. Number 4, did we get the best bang for our buck? Definitely. By keeping away from billet accessories, air conditioning, cup holders, and all other unnecessary gewgaws, there's no wasted time or money on this project. Everything on the car is there for a reason and fits the direction of a late 60s hot rod. And number 5, is it cool? Well, you've got the car, and the matching Gibson guitar, and the appearance in the book, The Last Rock and Roll Show. That's a pretty cool deal. But you also have the fact that Revell is coming out with a Rat Roadster model, so you can build your own. And it doesn't just come with the car, they've also included a scale copy of the guitar, too. Now, that's really cool.